call the school committee meeting to order at 8:00 something, and please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we are here, day 2 of our Superintendent of Schools interviews. And this evening we have Dr. Timothy Sippel with us today. I'll let you have a quick sip before we get started. And so I'm going to start us off, and then we'll all be asking questions of you. So if we could start out by you giving us a little bit of an idea of why you're seeking the superintendency here in Marlborough specifically, and what you think the combination of your skills and the needs of our district, how they coalesce.
All right. Well, good evening, and thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. Get the echo straight.
It does sound very echoey.
Yeah.
It's very echoey.
They'll adjust it. They're in the back.
Well, first of all, I just appreciate your commitment as members of the school committee and just the effort you go to represent your constituents and ultimately the interest of the students and the children here in Marlborough. And it really is an honor to be a finalist for this position, very, very important position. So to answer your question, I believe that my background, that my experience, the skills, and that my character are a perfect fit for your next superintendent. I have extensive leadership, both at the elementary and secondary levels, both at the school level and the district office roles. I have experience and skill engaging parents, business partners, higher education, community-based organizations, and others in the community to support the district's goals. And I have the vision and temperament, I believe, to ensure that the district continues to do the things that are working well, while also identifying those things that need to be looked at and need to be changed, and to do that in a way that's thoughtful and respectful of the work that's happening already. So I'll just share a little bit more about each of those things. As I've had an opportunity to share with some of you, because you were on the search committee with whom I interviewed a few weeks ago. I grew up in Cincinnati, where I developed a deep commitment to public education through my own experience growing up in racially integrated public schools, and through which I also had the blessing of learning Spanish. When I graduated from college, my first job in education was as a Spanish bilingual teacher in Southern California. I thought I was going to teach upper grades, but I ended up starting with second grade and then went down to first grade, and then I taught grades 1, 2, and 3 for a while, and then fourth and fifth grade as English immersion classes, before ultimately at a school of some 3,700 students in one school building, although there were about 2,500 at a time. They were rotated in and out. We had 1,000 English learners in that building, and I became the program coordinator for English learner programs in that facility, in that school, which was grades K through 12. I got my master's degree. I became an assistant principal at the middle and high school level in another district in Southern California. I was a district coordinator of high school learning pathways, which were not pathways like you have here, but they were college and career pathways that were academic and career technical programs blended together. And then I was a high school principal for 5 years, which was an amazing experience. And then in 2017, I came to Massachusetts with my family because I was admitted to a doctoral program that offered a fully funded scholarship, but it required that you come and study in person, and so I came. In that program, I had the opportunity to learn alongside and work with educational leaders from across the country. The third year of that program was a residency where I had the opportunity to work alongside the superintendent and district leadership in the Cambridge Public Schools. I worked mainly with elementary schools that year on math intervention up until the time COVID shut everything down, and then I worked on COVID for the end of that year. And then when I graduated from that program in 2020, I had the opportunity I was given the opportunity to work in Worcester as a manager for instruction and school leadership, which is what they call assistant superintendents, basically. I oversee, supervise the instruction of almost 11,000 students in that district currently. All of the high schools, all of the middle schools, and a number of specialized alternative schools for newcomers and those who have been unsuccessful in a regular high school or middle school environment. And that has been a tremendous opportunity. I love the work that I'm doing with my colleagues in Worcester and with the tremendously diverse community in Worcester. And so I've done a lot. And that extensive experience at the elementary and secondary levels, at the school and at the district level, I believe would be extremely useful to what you need in your next superintendent, especially as it involves ensuring that every student receives excellent instruction in every classroom every day. In terms of engaging with parents and the broader community, I think that I would be a perfect match because of your district's socioeconomic diversity, your ethnic diversity, the linguistic diversity, and I have a long track record through all of the workplaces that I've worked of engaging parents in innovative ways and effective ways. I believe that decisions are better when as many people are included in the process as possible. And I'm fully bilingual in Spanish. I know Portuguese is the number one second language here in Marlborough, but being bilingual in Spanish has really allowed me to be effective in engaging Latino students, parents, and families. And if you'll permit me, cuando digo que soy bilingüe, lo digo en serio. Puedo comunicarme perfectamente en el español, algo que también me ha ayudado a ganar la confianza de estudiantes y familias que hablan otros idiomas también. My ability to speak Spanish has helped me gain trust of parents and families who speak other languages. And in Worcester, I've had a chance to work with a lot of Brazilian families, a lot of Brazilian students, along with students from Haiti, from West Africa, from Southeast Asia, from Eastern Europe. And just speaking just another language, first of all, it gives me empathy from remembering when I learned a language, when I learned Spanish, when I was in Argentina that year. That empathy goes a long way. Even if they don't speak Spanish, they can appreciate that I understand what they're experiencing as a second language learner. I also believe that you have a lot of great partnerships in Marlborough. I know that, was it Quest Diagnostics recently came to the table with a significant contribution. Over the course of my career, I've successfully engaged leaders from multiple agencies in the community, local government, higher education, philanthropic foundations, social services, to really accomplish things that the school can't do by itself or that the district can't do it by itself. And I would bring those skills, those experiences, and the ability to create those relationships and cultivate those relationships to Marlborough. The last thing that I want to just reiterate is in terms of vision and temperament, that I perceive that the school committee and the community is not necessarily looking for someone to come in and bring about a dramatic change of direction from the leadership that you've had under Superintendent Bergeron. And I also appreciate, I heard it from the superintendent myself, that there is an interest in wanting to improve and wanting to grow and wanting to identify things that need to change or that could be better. And as I said earlier, I think it's just really important to honor the work that's been happening and to not come in with I told the staff at the high school today, I'm not one that shoots from the hip. I really like to, I am someone who engages people, who listens, really listens, and really tries to understand deeply what's happening, what the data say, and what people are actually attempting to do, and what the causes of the disconnects might be when there is a disconnect. And I develop trusting relationships with people, and I model the development of trusting relationships with people, whether they're school committee members, or parents, or principals, teachers, students. I really value the opinions of everyone within the system to try to see how this elephant, really is shaped, if you know that metaphor. Because everyone has a piece of understanding of what the issues are, but that the whole, we have to come together to try to piece it together. And I just believe that your district is a district where new ideas are welcomed, but they have to be introduced in a way that will need to be introduced in a way that makes sense to people, and where they've sensed that they understand the need and they can understand the rationale for what those changes might be. And I don't prejudge or presume to know what those changes might be sitting here today necessarily. So just to recap, extensive leadership, elementary and secondary, experience engaging parents, and also just vision and temperament to carefully and thoughtfully and respectfully engage your community in building on the successes that you've had as you move into the next phase. Sorry, this long answer.
Yes, that's okay. Thank you. Dan?
Well, I think most of us here especially will agree that student learning is paramount to the success of the district. However, identifying learning targets, measuring student growth, and determining responsibility for success continues to be under a little bit of debate. Please share your thoughts on how districts should hold themselves accountable, that's in addition to anything the state may require, for academic progress improvement, and what steps should be taken when benchmarks are not met, and if possible, please share any example from your professional life that you might have.
So, thank you. There's a lot there. I mean, for one thing, academics are extremely important. I think it's fundamentally the core mission that we have is to make sure that our students are prepared academically for the future. And so the state summative assessments, MCAS, are important, and they give us valuable information, give the district valuable information on a year-to-year basis from grades 3 through 8 and then grade 10 of whether we're preparing our students well for college or for career or whatever they want to do beyond. I think one important thing that I appreciate about Massachusetts and the way it approaches assessment at the state level is just the growth percentile that is a very really informative feature of the assessment data, because you could have two students who are both fourth graders or both fifth graders, but based on where those students were the year prior, they might both be at a comparable level in terms of whether they've met or exceeded expectations, but compared to where they were performing the prior year, one may have made huge gains relative to the other. And I think especially when you have a district with a large number of English learners, where it's understandable that they'd be coming in and they would not be performing at grade level in English to start, then you're going to have, there's going to be a need to really look at the growth percentile to see how students are gaining over time. And Access, which is the English learner assessment that Massachusetts uses, is useful for the same reason. But I think the other thing I would say, I know that you do use formative assessments as a district. I know also that you have a tremendous gift in that the majority of your teachers, if not most teachers, have professional learning community time built into their schedule. And that's time when those teachers themselves should be looking at that formative data. And not just the measure of academic progress that you get through NWEA, not just the data you have from the state, but assessments that they're using themselves, assessments that they've designed as a team, and assessments that are designed to see the performance of students, not at a surface level, but really at a deeper level of comprehension. I think another thing that I know the state pays attention to, but I think that sometimes districts don't pay attention to enough are not just graduation rates, but matriculation to post-secondary study, persistence in post-secondary study, and degree attainment in post-secondary study. Not to say that every student must go to college, but that's something that, when students graduate from our high schools, and especially if they do matriculate to a college, how are they doing? Are they able to move to a second year? Are they able to move towards degree attainment? And if not, what might that say? And obviously it's a lagging indicator, but how do we use that information to inform our secondary and our elementary programs to make sure that students are ready when we send them out? The last thing I would just say is process indicators. And what I mean by that are surveys that tell us from a climate standpoint, how are we doing? Do our students feel safe? Do our teachers feel supported? Do parents feel a part of the school community? Are students' social emotional needs being met? And there are many, I know the state has a survey that they use for that purpose, but there are other instruments that I think a lot of districts found very useful in trying to assess how are we doing in terms of those process indicators. And really determining the staff too, to what degree are their ideas respected and incorporated and integrated into the plans of the school, and how the parents and caregivers feel that they're being served. So academic, post-secondary process indicators. And then as far as what to do when those things are not happening, I'll go back to I think probably one of the most critical things is for the superintendent and the principals, or let's just say it's a given school, a principal at a given school, and look at one aspect of achievement that seems to be stubbornly unresponsive to a lot of efforts that have been put in, to look at that data and to engage the team of teachers who are working with the students who are reflected in that data. Not the students, but their performance on a particular day or a particular period of time is reflected in that data. And to ask them what they think is happening, what they think is going on. And to actually observe alongside them, perhaps, what's going on in terms of instruction in those classrooms that might be contributing or not contributing to the success of students on that particular metric. In my current role, that's one of the things that I've enjoyed doing the most, especially with all of the other things the principals are involved with. This year of all years, coming out of COVID, to really work with them and observing classrooms and dialoguing with teachers about practice that could make a big difference in shifting the achievement of a particular class or a group of students within a class. And I think that's making the connection between the data and instructional practice and making that explicit, not from a punitive gotcha way at all, but from an ongoing dialogue about practice is really critical.
Great, thank you.
Earl.
All right, so you obviously have experience with some of this. So tell us about your experience working with children and families who don't look like you or speak the language you do or do not have the economic advantages you do. How have these experiences shaped your view of public education and its mission? And perhaps you could share some of those innovative ways to engage the parents that you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, some of my earliest memories are with the church that I grew up in, and the fact that we're always white and black parishioners, if you want to call it that. We didn't call them that, but members of the congregation, and kids from those families. My first teacher was a black educator in kindergarten, and I had dozens of educators over the course of my K-12 schooling who were educators of color. And by design, my elementary and middle school classes were 50-50 in Cincinnati. That's what we had as far as diversity to a great extent at the time, was white and black folks. So, and I just, that really shaped me in a profound way. My high school was 75% African American, and I had an amazing experience. And in the midst of being there, I also saw ways that high school, my high school, was disparaged by many in the community and did not receive the same resources that certain other schools in the community, in the city. And in dialoguing with my teachers, my high school teachers, as I was on my way to college and shortly afterwards, I became even more aware of inequities that I had been aware of as I was coming up. And that ultimately was a huge influence in me going into public education in the first place. As an educator, I worked for the majority of my career with Latino students and African American students. Those were the students that attended the schools where I worked. And I loved working with both of those communities and still do. And I was, as I mentioned earlier, I in particular developed a lot of expertise working with English learners because that was, that's why I was hired in the first place. In Worcester is even probably the most diverse place that I've ever worked. It's an amazingly diverse location and city, community, where, as I shared earlier, that in addition to Latino and African American, there are many, many other communities and nationalities that are represented there. And at the end of the day, my desire is to ensure that no matter what group a student comes from, no matter what language they or their parents speak, no matter what their income level might be, that they're getting the very best we can provide them in terms of education. And I would say one other thing is that I've discovered that it's extremely important, no matter how rich of the experience I've had with diversity, that I'm always growing, I'm always learning, and I need to be proactive in asking individuals that I work with or that I'm serving who are from a different background, basically to inquire and check me, because I have blind spots and there's things that I may not be aware of, and I want to make sure that I'm sensitive to those things. And when I don't understand, I want to ask them, can you explain more? Can you explain to me what that means, or how I offended you? I mean, I just think that that's just really important, and I've been blessed by the many ways that folks from multiple backgrounds have treated me and have invited me into their homes and their communities. And I just see the beauty of the diversity that we have in our country, and the beauty of the diversity you have here in Marlborough. And I want to see more folks appreciate that, and to ensure that with respect to educational services and with respect to educational opportunity, that every student receives what they deserve.
Just to follow up, so can you share with us one of the innovative ways you've engaged the community that you mentioned earlier?
So one thing that, as a high school principal, that I found extremely important was to communicate regularly with all of the parents, even if it was just a short message, but on a weekly basis, every Sunday night, what's happening this coming week. And for that community, I recorded that message in English and I recorded that message in Spanish every Sunday night. And that may sound like a boring thing, but for some of my families, that was something they looked forward to. Other families, I'm sure they had me blocked. They weren't getting that message. But I had one parent. She was an English-speaking parent, but she said that was her Sunday night pep rally when she got my phone call. No, but what was really important about that was that the parents could expect it. They could rely on it every single week, and they knew it was going to be in my voice, and they knew that if there was something important, some schedule change or some other event that was happening that week, they would know about it because I told them. And then that was the only time that I recorded and sent a message, was Sunday night, because the rest of the week I didn't want them to have the whole boy cried wolf thing where they were just like, oh, forget it, they're calling again. Only Sunday night. The district would send its message out on Monday nights. But it was really effective, super effective. And then when they did get a message on a different night, they knew that it was important because we didn't do that. I say that because it was, when you're dealing with hundreds of families at once, that is a very effective way to establish rapport and relationship, even if it's just a one-way message. When I would meet the parents at a back-to-school night, or when they would come to the school, they go, oh, you're the one, because they recognized my voice, so they didn't know what I looked like in many cases. And I shared with the search committee in the first round interview another way that we engaged families in that particular context was to actually assemble teams of folks from the school community, teachers, students, parents who were already committed, alumni, other volunteers from the community, and we organized on this was once a year, Saturday morning, before the applications were due for the local charter school, before the applications were due for open enrollment to go to a school besides the one that you would go to based on your residence. And we identified all of the students that were assigned to come to our school for the following year. And we knocked on their doors. And we had a bag of gifts for them with brochures that we delivered to them by hand. And we knew which ones spoke Spanish, we knew which ones spoke English, and we had maps for each. It was quite an operation. But we had families who went after they got that information and that visit, and we didn't go inside usually. We just knocked on the door and greeted them on the front porch, or we left the bag on the doorknob if they weren't home. They came to the school to do the tour. Or I would find out a year later, oh, you know why I came here, Mr. Sippel? It's because you came to my door and you met my dad. And I was like, what? Really? Are you kidding? It's because a lot of times we wouldn't know because they were supposed to come to our school anyway. They didn't have to check a box that said, we came because you visited my house. But that is a way that you don't necessarily do, we can't do, marshal those kinds of efforts on a weekly basis, but it does make a difference. It does make a difference when a family has someone from the school or from the district not coming to say something's wrong, not coming to say, we're here to tell you, speak to you because we need you to sign these forms, but we're just here because we want to invite you to the school. We're going to be having an orientation for incoming parents and families next week, and or in 2 weeks, or whatever the time is. And it's that important that we want to communicate that to you. Or you have a meeting in the church basement. I mean, or you have a carnival, and pass out the information there. But getting out to the community, those are when, instead of only expecting parents to come to the school, is a very effective way in my experience.
Thank you. Denise?
All right, mine is multi-parts, like 4 parts. So you ready? What are your strategies for fostering a positive relationship with the school committee regarding making an educational policy for the district, setting budget priorities and formal spending plans, engaging in collective bargaining, and also creating a solid administrative and policy-making team that supports the district's goals and objectives?
You were right. It was a long question. I would say, with regards to, as a superintendent, what I would aspire to in relating to you as a school committee would be, first of all, positive, trusting relationships, individually and as a group. Real clear definition of roles in terms of your role as a school committee as being responsible for setting policy, for governance, and superintendent's role for executing that policy, for managing. And a foundation of clear expectations with regards to everything, but most importantly, communication, interactions with district staff, and other processes and protocols dealing with parent complaints. But if selected, I would aspire to develop an individual relationship with each of you. And I would envision that based on the experience of colleagues that I've worked with in the past who were superintendents. Just have whatever each individual person felt was most useful, but a one-on-one meeting or conversation or interaction on a regular basis, just to be on the same page with each other, me and that member, me and that member. And then I think, especially initially in my tenure, if selected, I would anticipate the value of some larger, longer blocks of time where, as a group, the school committee and I could develop a positive working relationship and really achieve some clarity about the roles that I mentioned, and achieve some clarity also for me regarding what has worked for you all here in Marlborough in the past in terms of those protocols that I mentioned. So if someone comes to you with a complaint, how do you handle that? How do you redirect that to the superintendent, or do you run with it? Or if there is an issue that you become aware of, in what forum does that handle? Does it wait until there's a school committee meeting and it's put on the agenda? Or is there an opportunity to have a conversation with the superintendent so that he or she might be able to clarify, no, that's not actually what's happening. You don't need to put that on the agenda. But I think that just I really value transparency. I really value honesty. I really value being able to have trust with people. And I think most people value those things. But they're not to be taken for granted. They need to be cultivated and worked at. You mentioned a lot of different things, Member Ryan, but I think a lot of that flows from that kind of place. So with respect to collective bargaining, you, as the school committee, set policy and ultimately make the decision of whether to sign off on a collective bargaining agreement. And you have the responsibility of managing the purse of the district, and you're aware of what those constraints might be. But I, as a superintendent, am working and interacting with my team as the principals and with the other district staff, and also interacting with the leaders of our collective bargaining units to understand their needs. And I have to be in the middle of that. I mean, you're relying on the superintendent to apprise you of needs that you may not be aware of, and obviously, at the end of the day, I'm relying on the school committee to ratify an agreement that I think is going to accomplish the mission of the district. And I think at the end of the day, the collective bargaining units, all of our educators, the school committee, the district administration, we all want the same thing. We all want our students to succeed, but how that gets sorted out can be messy. But the school committee and the superintendent, I believe we have to be really, really tight and really on the same page about that and several of the other things that you mentioned. And was there one or two other things that I forgot?
The relationship with the school committee in regards to budget priorities and spending plans.
So same thing. I mean, not same thing, but same idea. That really that relationship is strong if the role definition is clear, if protocols are established for how these processes are to be executed, then I will be able to bring to the school committee reliable information about what the needs of the district are, and we'll be able to have dialogue about that information. And similarly, and this goes to my answer to the first question, there are bound to be, especially as the needs of the district change, there are bound to be changes in strategy and approaches that may be required. I'm very aware, it's already in the DESE data, the significant increase in English learners that you've had, and I'm told anecdotally by folks today that those numbers understate the increase in English learners that you've had as a district. And so it could well be that some of the strategy for improvement that you have devised needs to be tweaked, it needs to be revised. That's information that I would bring to you, but in a way that ultimately, with regards to budget, with regards to any district policy that might need to be reconsidered, that would be your purview, and we would need to really collaborate to make sure that those needs are met.
Ms. Catherine.
Okay. So we touched a little bit upon budget there, but can you tell us more in details about your experience relative to pulling together a budget, developing it, how to advocate for it, because that's really critical, especially not just here in front of the school committee, but with the community and obviously with the city and the city councilors and mayor. And then really understanding about that spending as things change along the way, how to adapt appropriately, and then evaluating whether the resources have really helped to achieve the goals that we've established. so to get to those outcomes. So I have a layered question too. You know, we like a lot in our questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, one thing that I did not say at the outset when I answered the question about why Marlborough, I mean, you have a reputation as a place that is very well run and fiscally very, very well run, which, and not just well resourced. I mean, I think, you know, at least if the DESE website's to be trusted, you're about at state average as far as per pupil funding. I hope that's not incorrect. But beyond that, and I watched recently your February 16th budget workshop, all 1 hour and 36 minutes of it. And it was really good.
Riveting.
I wouldn't say it was riveting, but it was very encouraging because both the very deliberate process that the superintendent and the budget director laid out as far as why they were proposing certain expenditures that were different from the prior year. And in some cases, they were circling back to priorities that had been set aside in a previous year, but were still needed. And it was also encouraging in terms of the questions that the various members of the school committee and the mayor asked of the superintendent and trying to get more clarity. What is this? And really, I mean, looking at like single line items in some cases, what is this going on and what is this position? And it wasn't coming in a spirit of skepticism or criticism, but really just genuine curiosity to understand where the money was going. And from what I understand from the superintendent, that there has been a level of trust established with the city as a result, so that there is not as much. I understand that's what they're doing tonight, is meeting with the city council to sell the budget or to bring the proposed budget and seek approval from the city council for the coming year. As a doctoral resident, as a special assistant in Cambridge, I had a chance to be a part of the district leadership meetings where their budget was developed in that process. In Worcester, I've also been a part of the budget development process there. What that looks like has been meeting with individual principals and getting a sense from them based on the needs of their school community, what changes they think might be needed for the following year, and resource allocation, resource request process. And we do that with all of the schools and also with the district departments. So if there are needs that they see, that those requests can also be factored in. But then we have to look at, well, what are the resources we actually have? And at that point, there's a need to really come to terms with the constraints that we have and figure out what those priorities should be. Certainly, there's a need. There's a public process also, as far as like the hearing that you had or that workshop you had. Those are done in public. I think there's also a need at the school level, as a part of each school's council, for parents to be a part of that process and educators to be a part of that process too. And at least that's what's set out in the Massachusetts general law. Those are opportunities that, I know there were certain years as a principal, it felt like, oh gosh, I have to have the site council look at this. There were, before we did the home visits, there were years where it was hard to pull everyone together for that school council. But really, that's a really useful container for that kind of engagement and that kind of feedback and that kind of input from parents, and really to confirm that the priorities that the school leader sees are needs that the parents can affirm and can agree with. And then similarly at the district level, to make sure that community, that the city, that parents, they also agree that those budget priorities that are being advanced and presented by the superintendent and the district administration resonate with them.
Right. So really your role so far to date in many cases has been much more of a collaborative nature of needing to work with different folks in different areas to really pull together their expertise and to really then help them balance it out, as opposed to necessarily really taking much of a leadership role at this point of that overall budget, it sounds like.
For an entire district?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's accurate. But as a school principal, we had a budget of some $10 million. I mean, that was, and then there was a what they call a categorical budget of grants and other title funds that,
yeah.
That also needed to be carefully, budgeted for the maximum benefit for students. And so at the school level, I was very much the one designing those budgets and designing that process to get that input from others. At the district level, I've been in the mix and very collaboratively engaged in that process, but I've not been a chief financial officer.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think as you just pointed out, I mean, there are different elements, whether it's the grants, the IDEA, whether it's the Title I elements, there's so many different layers that are necessary.
I'll just jump on that last piece about the grants. I have been very involved in both helping to write grants and design grant proposals and also figuring out budgets for grants, both in my district, last district in California, as well as in Worcester. And that is something that I definitely have a lot of experience with.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Denise.
I'm up again. This one's shorter. Tell us about the experiences you have had with collective bargaining. What is the best role for the superintendent, and what do you view as the role of the school committee in collective bargaining?
So I think I kind of addressed that in your previous question, but I'll go a little bit deeper into it. I think that ultimately, I was speaking about the school committee and the superintendent needing to have trusting relationships, and when I responded to that question, it's also very, very important for the superintendent to have trusting relationships with the leaders of the various bargaining units. They have a job to do in making sure that they're representing the interests of their members, and really just ensuring that our educators and our other employees are respected as individuals who are doing hard jobs and doing them for the benefit of the students in our district. And they need to know that when I say something or I make a commitment to explore something, that I'm actually going to follow through on that. And I need to know that when they tell me something along the same lines, that they're going to follow through on that also. There needs to be trust among all the leaders in the process. And there are also bound to be ways, even once agreements are established, there are also bound to be situations, there always can be, where there may be tensions in terms of, or different interpretations of what different articles of the collective bargaining agreement mean in a certain circumstance, or for a certain employee, or for a certain situation. And when those come up, it's just really important to find compromise, and in some cases, agree to disagree. There's processes for all of that. But throughout, just that earnest pursuit of a trusting relationship and clarity of position is really important. Because as I said earlier, ultimately we want the same thing. I've had the opportunity to serve on the bargaining team for the management in Worcester the last 2 years. I won't say more than that, but I mean, I've been at the table alongside the superintendent and the chief of human resources and the district leadership that's on that team, and you know, I've learned a lot. I'll say that. I had a chance to observe the collective bargaining in a more limited way, but I also had a chance to observe that in Cambridge and to see how the process works. In talking with Superintendent Bergeron today, I was very, very interested to learn about the interest-based bargaining that you all engaged in here, that he said was not easy, but was extremely useful, extremely effective for all sides. And I'd been exposed to that approach in my graduate work, and I'm very interested to learn more about it.
Great. Dan?
It's sort of a teacher-oriented question that might kind of follow along with that as well. How have you personally used the evaluation process to improve performance and motivate teachers and administrators? And I have a second part, which may be a surprise to you. What do you do to ensure that the evaluators that work under you are objective and consistent when they do their evaluations of their evaluatees?
Okay, so there are two. I think there's. I know you asked specifically about the evaluation system, and I'll answer that.
Okay.
I would just say that I think the formal evaluation system is one thing, and then there's improvement. And I'm not saying that the formal evaluation system is an enemy of improvement, but I don't think that the formal evaluation system is adequate for improvement either. So in terms of the formal evaluation system, I mean, it's required by state law. There is a beautiful architecture to it in terms of the employee or the educator or the administrator articulating, first of all, assessing themselves and then establishing goals for the cycle, and coming to some consensus agreement with the evaluator on what evidence would be acceptable to demonstrate attainment of those goals over the course of the cycle. Understanding that the evaluator will need to rate the educator or the administrator on all of the standards that are a part of the state rubric. And the educator will be expected to provide evidence that would be useful and informative in terms of making those evaluations. And that's all important, and I think it's better than what I was familiar with in California, to be honest with you, and it needs to be done with integrity. And yet, if we are relying on that to improve our academic achievement and to improve instruction in service of improved academic achievement, it's way too unwieldy and way too cumbersome to expect that kind of result. And what I mean by that is that there's just a need for a much even more collaborative and engaging ongoing dialogue between the administrator and the educators and teams of educators, and between the superintendent and the principal, and perhaps a group of principals who are all working with a similar context, to have ongoing dialogue about what is happening, what their goals are, what growth is happening, how do we know that it's happening, what actions are the next steps, and to observe that in process in classrooms to see what's happening. And again, that can all be memorialized and captured to some degree in the evaluation system, but there needs to be, the dialogue needs to transcend that and be happening in a way that goes beyond the the checklists that are in that system. And having said that, I think that there is value, especially for administrators to gather and to compare notes and to see how they, well, first of all, the state has a very useful system for this called Optic, where you can watch a lesson or a portion of a lesson, and you can score it on this computer platform, and then compare how you've scored it with your colleagues who watch the same exact lesson. That's pretty cool. It's relatively new, and I think its implementation, its rollout got interrupted, like a lot of things, by COVID-19. But that's very useful for training administrators to be on the same page and calibrate their expectations with respect to the rubric. Something that I have experienced that I think is also useful is to actually bring copies of an evaluation and black out the teacher's name. I did this when I was an administrator, and this was convened by the chief of human resources at the time. But it was extremely important because teaching is a lonely exercise, and evaluating instruction can also be a lonely exercise unless there's some intentionality to really bring people together and compare and just make sure that there is consistency in terms of how it's being done. And that was very useful to me as an administrator, and I would approach it the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Earl.
All right, it's a long question, but there's really only one question at the end of it.
Okay.
So it's a scenario. A student has complained to the police that he was harassed in the locker room by members of his lacrosse team. The abuse included pushing, hazing, verbal taunting, and possibly actions with sexual overtones. The parents of the alleged victim want a criminal complaint issued and investigated. The alleged victim is under 18, and the perpetrators may also be under 18. A local reporter gets wind of the story from a student source inside the school and has some names of involved persons. You've had a mixed relationship with this news source. The reporter contacts the superintendent with some of the following questions. Can you confirm that it was the lacrosse team? Where was the adult supervision? Has the school department issued appropriate mandated reports on the victims? We're told this has happened before, so what can you tell us? If you stonewall us, we'll report that as well because we think some of the students are not eligible for protection as juvenile sources. What are some of the things you think about as a superintendent, and how do you respond?
Okay.
Damn.
So you were right, that was a long question, but it was only just one question. So I think I heard a lot there about the reporter and responding to the reporter, but I think what my mind goes to in terms of what I think about is a student who was harmed. A student who, in our care, was not safe. And so the first priority is to really understand what happened with that student and to ensure that that student is protected and that student is safe, and then to ensure that the investigation into that incident is handled with great care and deliberate speed to ensure that no other student has to be victim of the same kind of harm. And whoever was responsible is held accountable for that, for what occurred. While those actions are taking place, and while that investigation is happening, that reporter's gonna have to be patient. And I would zoom out and say that it's of great importance precisely for situations like that, for the district to have proactive communication with families, for the superintendent to have proactive communication with the community, so that when a rogue reporter might say that the superintendent, refused to comment, that a great majority of families in the district, having heard the superintendent call them the night before, would say, okay, there's probably a good reason why the superintendent didn't talk to them, if they even bother to read the article. So I guess I just say that the priority really needs to be on the student and on safety. And then in addition to that, make sure that the investigation is handled appropriately and as quickly as possible, and that whoever is responsible, whether students, whether there's staff, are held accountable, and that measures are put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And then when information is available to share with the press, and I don't know what would ultimately be possible to share based on confidentiality and student privacy, it will be shared, but that's not the first concern. The first concern is the safety of the students and making sure that our systems are in place to ensure that those kinds of incidents don't occur.
Thank you.
Great. That's the end of our questions.
Okay. Great.
And we're about the end of our time.
Okay.
Any last minute thing you want to say?
I just greatly appreciate the opportunity to interview with you. It's, again, an honor to be a finalist to be superintendent in Marlborough Public Schools. And I really appreciate you and the decision you're making. But if selected, I believe I would be a great superintendent for you. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Safe driving out there.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a couple-minute recess.